International Hemp Solutions, and IHS is focused on simplifying the global supply chain for industrial hemp. That's a huge amount of words, and they sound really buzzy, but we because all along the way, we knew that there's going to be these obstacles and these things that really prevented people from being successful, down to the farmers, to the buyers and the wholesalers looking for, how do I get a valid transaction to take place, to ultimately the end consumers, and really getting the right information out there. So when, like, I called my mom and I told her I was taking this job, she's like, "Oh, is that safe? Are you going to be working for a marijuana company now?" "No, Mom, this is not marijuana." So I think that's really what we're about. And ehemp is our direct-to-consumer platform, and we're really aggregating the best-in-class brands that can do two things. One, which is help our mission, which is to help 1 million people replace an everyday product with a hemp-based alternative, really is a means to get to that more sustainable lifestyle. And we always say, like, going green doesn't have to be hard. One small change can make a big difference. So we want to help people do that. The second piece is there's been lots of talk and chatter about the bad actors in the industry relative to CBD, and we want to solve that problem. So we have very rigorous, very detailed processes around the companies that we want to partner with and tell the customer, listen, we have your back. And thanks to our partnership with Hoban, we've been able to come up with this very solid vetting process that I would put up against anyone. So we're proud of that too. That's my spiel.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And Jessica brings up a really good point here. Focus of this panel is going to be on the environmental issues of hemp. So if you're hoping to learn about the medical effects of CBD, I'm sorry to disappoint you. You're going to have to go to one of the millions of other CBD-focused panels at this conference or another conference. We're going to be focusing on the bigger picture issue of the environment. Jason?
Well, hello there. I'm Jason Hoar. I started my first hemp business in 1997 after attending the Cannabis Cup out in Amsterdam. Didn't quite work because I wasn't able to grow the hemp here in the U.S. close to the customers. I spent a little over a decade in the biodiesel industry, and I wrote the BQ 9000 standard for quality control. Worked with each of the 50 states' departments of weights and measures and helped them integrate this new product into their existing infrastructure and established proactive testing and corrective actions. It's a lot of chocolate-covered coffee beans. Really dry, boring stuff, but very important. And right now I'm in Southern Medford. My business, along with my partners, we are a CBD refiner. We are USDA certified organic as a standalone facility, one of the few in the world that only does hemp, not hemp and blueberries or whatever. We are vertically integrated through collaboration and visibility from the soil samples to the water samples to the genetics, nutrients, everything along the line, and a rigorous testing protocol. And I think as it relates to what we're talking about here today, that data, those measurements, that's where we can make sure that we're doing it right and building a regenerative process and adding back. So that's what I do.
Well, thank you so much for what you do, Jason. So we want to start things off just with a brief history of the growth of the hemp industry. And since Patrick and Jason are kind of there for that, I'd love it if you guys start things off.
Yeah, so things were really for hemp really started taking off in, I would say, at least for me, in the early 90s. And what we were, at the time, it was hemp clothing, principally coming from China or Europe, hemp hats, shirts and whatnot. But towards the end of the 90s, we started understanding more and more about the nutritional value of hemp seed and the oil and the essential fatty acids that we get from the oil, as well as it serving to be almost a complete protein, a very high value protein.
It's got almost the perfect blend of omega-3 and omega-6 acids too.
Yeah, the essential fatty acids. It helps it can replace salmon or fish oil without the mercury and hopefully without too many heavy metals coming from the plants. But it was the rise of hemp foods in the late 90s, early 2000s that gave rise to this concern by ONDCP and DEA that hemp hype was a stalking horse for marijuana, and so they needed to attempt to snuff it out. And that's what they did with these interpretive and proposed rules in the early 2000s that said that trace quantities of THC is actually a drug. And the Ninth Circuit said no. It's coming from hemp and marijuana. We were under the definition of marijuana at the time. We didn't have a definition of industrial hemp until 2014. And under that definition, there are so-called exempt parts of the plant. So what they were essentially doing was they were engaged in a scheduling action, and they got shot down by the court, which ultimately helped pave the way as through the aughts and into the early teens. We started understanding more and more, and it was the rise of the CBD space and the cannabinoids. Hemp was always seen as capturing the material from the seed and the stalk, but not from the flower and the leaves, because that was marijuana. But then we realized that there's a lot more there. There's some 100 plus cannabinoids in the flowers that are bringing a lot more to humans and animals than THC. And so it was that case that kind of helped give the rise to that side of the industry. But at the time it was all relying on imports because we couldn't produce in the United States. And it wasn't until 2014 that we did start to produce after the Farm Bill was passed. It provided us with the research capabilities, which also included market research and commercial sales. But where I'm getting to is that we're at this point. We're at this crossroads, or we're at this point in time where it's the flowers and the CBD that's kind of all the rage right now. But what's happening with the rest of the plant? And that's what we're really here to talk about, is taking advantage of 95% of the plant that's being left on the field. And ultimately we're going to get to the expansive use of the biomass, a myriad of uses, but it's going to take the processing, both infrastructure, investment, and processing technology and capabilities, and also companies investing on the end use, energy, replacing graphene and super capacitors and so forth. So I mean, there are so many industrial applications, from animal bedding and feed to building materials, and that's the holy grail in hemp, and that's what we're really excited about getting to.
Absolutely. Jason, do you have anything you wanted to add on the history there real quick?
Well, and the history is great, and part of what we're doing is recognizing that history and looking at these. So waste is a misnomer. It's our relationship to our resources, and one of the things that's a byproduct for hemp processing today is when we take all the biomass and we extract it, generally with CO2 or with ethanol, and then you have this cake left over. And so what folks have been doing the last couple of years, they just compost it. We've been engaged in studies now to look at that cake as animal feed, and so create this byproduct, make it into a co-product. And so there's studies going on right now to look at that and how that works. We're also looking to...
if I could just piggyback off that real quick, a huge point brought up to me years ago by somebody who's involved in a cannabis company from the Midwest, from farming areas. Years ago, before we had these epidemics of cancer and other diseases in America, hemp seed was a common, well, not just hemp seed, hemp fibers as well. Hemp was a common animal feed. We cut that out of animals' diets. We thus cut that out of our own diets because we eat those animals.
And so there's all these things that what drives us is we're after molecules. That's how it's what we do, and we're trying to create the purest, cleanest molecules that will go into distillate to help people feel better and heal themselves. And so that is our focus. But then we're also looking at the plants after we've shucked and pulled the flower and the leaves and everything off. We can do that for hempcrete. So some folks are putting that in hempcrete, and there's all these things. Haven't played with the root balls yet. I know someone's literally making tea out of it. Like, all right, I'll try that. But that's part of what we're working on too.
Yeah. So kind of jumping on to one of the big topics that was already brought up by Patrick in his history. Things started with fiber, also food, but things have. So compared to cotton, hemp is a much more environmentally sustainable crop. It produces much more fiber per acre, using a lot less water, a lot less pesticide. So while hemp is much more sustainable and should theoretically be cheaper because there's less inputs going in, most hemp is still imported. In addition, there aren't that many fiber processing options here domestically. So there's still a lot of barriers in companies switching over to hemp due to the increased cost of that. Not just for fibers, also when it comes to hemp bioplastics, really anything from hemp, it's still a little more expensive. So what can we do to reduce those costs and reduce those barriers and thus increase companies' likelihood to make a switch to hemp?
Can I start? Just
Please.
like how many people in the audience like believe in hemp fiber and textiles? How many people are wearing it? Okay, so it all starts with us, you guys. Like, we're in the industry, and we've got to like wear the plant, love the plant, kind of be the change that we want to see. I'm going to give you guys, not to be self-serving, but I got to throw a plug. I will give you a code for our website. You can go and buy some hemp clothing later. But the other piece is, I think that when it comes to fiber and textiles in particular, because we think a lot about this, we're outsourcing every day trying to find amazing companies. When you think about domestic fiber being created, you talked about all the challenges that exist. The other part is, where are textiles being made today? And a lot of textiles have shipped out to Mexico, to China. So when we talk about the processing, we also have to think about how things are manufactured and where we buy a portion of our clothes. And when you bring it onshore and domestic, and then you talk about if we want to be true to ourselves and think about sustainability, it can't just start with the fiber. It's got to go down to how are things made, what are the jobs, what's the jobs, what's the working conditions, how are we using zero waste, right? So, and all of that together is going to make something more expensive. But if you get the quality, if you get the durability, if you get the longevity, if you know that when you wash this piece of clothing, 700,000 microfibers aren't ending up in your wash, which end up in the oceans, you're going to feel better about that. And that's
In
a
the
better
oceans,
story.
in the fish, in our
in
bodies.
in our bodies. I mean, there's like 5 grams of microfibers found in human stuff. So yeah, it's pretty gross when you think about it. And like, look, I've been part of the problem. Like, growing up, I didn't have that mentality. And you have kids, and then you learn and you become exposed, and you're like, wow, we have to make some changes. So I think there's a huge opportunity, but we do have to rally together and be the change first and foremost, help push for that demand ourselves, but then also really drive collectively money, because the cotton industry is, funneling hundreds of
subsidized as well.
heavily subsidized, but funneling hundreds of millions of dollars in just direct consumer advertising. And so you need that kind of a platform essentially to exist for hemp as a textile as well. But I'm very hopeful, because I think the more you read, the more you see, there is a push for change, and there's a push for change with consumers. I mean, there were millions of protesters just in this climate change protest that happened a couple of weeks ago. You see companies like Zara, who is very well known for fast fashion, talking about by 2025, they're only going to be using sustainable fibers. So the dialogue is happening. I think it's up to us as the industry to come together and say, the dialogue is happening, but it's got to be hemp, and hemp has to be there, and we've got to be part of that narrative, essentially, and we're not yet, because cotton ultimately is kind of driving that.
Yeah, but together with a partnership with public entities and government, and switching priorities as far as our subsidies go, but it's also ingenuity. And I was talking with a farmer a couple weeks ago down in Imperial Valley. He's from Fresno, and he's a cotton farmer. And he's working to process hemp fiber through his cotton gin. So it's taking the technology and the infrastructure that exists and refurbishing and adapting it. I'm not that engineering guy, but since we're here in California in terms of sustainability and leading, showing leadership, it was technology forcing. I think the government basically said, you need to reduce your emissions by X, and the technology didn't exist. Well, we created that technology in the catalytic converter. Yep. So we can't sit here and accept that because something doesn't exist, or that it doesn't exist as we would like it, that creates a barrier to us. But we have to barrel through that barrier, just like we've done with the laws and the policy.
Turn that problem into an opportunity. Jason, do you anything you want to add on that?
I remember those days back in the 90s getting hemp clothing from China, and they were processing
we still do get our hemp clothing from China.
They were processing it with hexane, and I found that it would just rip. I mean, I had and I'm kind of rough on things. I actually ironed my shirt today. I don't always do that. I mean, I'm wearing shoes. It's, flip-flops every 6 months. But I think the blends, too. I remember the hemp silk blend, and I remember the fibers that Joe Hickey was sharing about from Kentucky. They're about the diameter of your pinky, and they grow, and you get those really thin fibers, and they grow really well in Kentucky, and I think we need to do more of that. And I want that code, so I'm going to take you up on that.
So, other than turning hemp into fibers for clothing, another big thing we can do is turn hemp into plastics. Right now, there's a lot of companies working on hemp-based bioplastics. Companies like 9Fiber, the hemp plastic company, Sauna Packaging, are working with hemp farmers to turn what is currently waste into profit. So while through hemp-based bioplastics, we can create a circular economy. For anyone who doesn't know that term, that's where, like Jason was saying, there isn't waste, there's just other components. Everything is being used, it's being recycled, reused all the way through the process. So how far do you think we are from realizing that circular economy for hemp and for cannabis, and what do you think businesses and consumers can do to help encourage that?
Well, I think when you talk about how far away we are, it does go back to the seed and what people are planting for. So if you're not familiar with C2 Renew, they're one of the companies that are doing things in hemp bioplastics, and talking to the CEO recently, he cannot keep up with the demand because he does not have enough supply. And that really comes back to, well, everybody's hyped up on the CBD craze and, all of these acres being registered with state governments. And, the first thing they want to know is, where do I source the highest seed for the highest component of CBD, not necessarily thinking about all the uses. And probably, it's because, well, I don't know what the supply chain looks like. There's not really a great platform yet that's going to say, hey, farmer, if you grow for, grain or you grow for fiber, here's your path to purchase. Here's someone who's got a buyer for you. Here's where it goes. And we do need to figure out that supply chain a bit more. But I think, it's there and it's coming because clearly there's already some demand for it. And what we think about is really it's just about problem solving. So if the product itself is good, and then you've got the added bonus of, oh, well, it's hemp and it's a bioplastic and there's the storytelling behind it and it's recyclable, then that's all bonus. But we have to make good products too, right? It can't just be about like hemp and that it's bioplastic. You got to have something that you're solving for as a problem, as a brand. And so I would encourage anyone, if you look at all the different things that are single use today that we throw away, like how can we really be forward thinking and creative, to your point, looking at creating and devising and developing products that solve for that, because that's really the win.
And I think it's really important. There's a lot of farmers that got into CBD, and a year ago, a kilo of distillate was selling for $10,000. Today, it's maybe $2,500. So it's rationalizing. There's a lot of market things going on, a lot of big players in that are controlling the market because they can, and it's kind of a long-term plan, I think. But right now, with the farmers, we had a bad rain this year. And middle Oregon north, everything's bud rot. We're going to probably lose 70% of what was stated, what was licensed, and that's a guess. And I could be off, but even the CBGs that everyone's stoked on, we found that there's a lot of botrytis in them, and you can see it in a field, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, these farmers put everything into it. And a fourth farmer committed suicide this morning. And we're trying to organize the resources where, don't worry about it, Mr. Farmer. We'll come out and harvest and use all these mills and drying facilities. We'll just get it off, and we'll get you as much money as you can. But everyone got into it, and they didn't have a plan. And some of them were given seeds that were not good. Some of them were given seeds.
There's a big problem with people selling autoflower seeds they're pulling out of bird seed because it's legal, but it's going to be monoecious. It's going to make your whole crop flower and seed. It's not what you want.
And I think the biggest part of that I wanted to make on the point is plan for what you're going to do. Be patient. This is going to be around for decades. We're changing the world. It doesn't happen really quickly, and there's a lot of larger picture things until we have this circular economy. And we got to get rid of subsidies. Just get rid of every subsidy
or transition
everywhere.
them to the appropriate spot.
Well, I'm a little extreme. I say just get rid of them and we'll figure it out. And I could be wrong. I'm not an economist, and that could be not a good idea. But
Well, speaking of economics, the one thing that I would add to the question of how long it's going to take to get to the circular economy really depends on the amount of resources that are being thrown at it and being put at it. And you know, from an environmental perspective, I mean, this may not be totally right, but from my perspective, there are two super critical important things: plastics, you know, plant-based plastics, and removing carbon from the atmosphere. And if we could be channeling and prioritizing our resources on these two items, then we would be going a long way in resolving a lot of the conflicts and the catastrophes that we are currently staring down. And rather than shoving it under the rug, we'd actually be dealing with it. And unfortunately, we're just shoving it under the rug right now. And hopefully, as an optimist, we see change coming that will reprioritize where our resources are going, and because the vast majority of humanity knows that this needs to be addressed, and the same within this country.
Absolutely. And like you just mentioned, pulling CO2 out of the air is a huge thing. One way we can do that is by growing hemp. Hemp is voracious. It loves to pull in CO2. Then what we can do to further get CO2 out of the air is make that hemp into a biofuel. Research currently shows that not just the fiber in hemp, but even the terpenes can be used to make fuels, even high-potency fuels like rocket and jet fuel. So, panel, do we feel like it's more on government or on private businesses to be investing in hemp biofuels and to drive that demand for cleaner fuel alternatives?
Well, I know a little bit about fuels, and I just wanted to kind of wrap the plastic component, because that's also when you convert, you can use the oils to make the plastics, right? So, but here we are at this conference, right? And we all have an interest in something, and around you are all the tools, the farmers, all the products, the distribution points. And part of what I do with all of our companies is I just ask people to look themselves in the mirror and what do you love to do and what are you really good at, and be honest with yourself about that. And then what are you not good at and what do you not like to do, and find other people to do that. But you've got all these things, and when you find that and we see you thriving, we're going to help push you, boost you, pull you up, and everyone just, let's go. We can all do this. There is so much to be done. We don't have to worry about competition or fear of losing margin or any of that. There's so much to do. So, and I think anyone that's focusing on plastics has the resources. It's here. You can make products, you can make little spinners, whatever, and you got a place to sell them. And so I think, and I agree, plastics is probably the biggest thing to focus on, because.
Well, I was just going to say on to the question on the biofuel piece, I think if we're waiting on government, we'll probably be waiting for a while. There's just too much money, with respect to oil. And so this is not necessarily my area of expertise. It's just straight opinion at this stage, so take it for what you want. But I think that, no one told Elon Musk, hey, wait for the government to go create your Tesla, right? He wanted to create and build this amazing car that was, energy efficient. And there's money and there's resources, to your point, and it exists in this room and it exists, I think, in this industry. And so it's just going to take somebody who's willing to throw down the cash and look for the long-term strategy, not the short-term return, because it will not happen overnight, to your point. And so you're going to have to play the long game relative to this.
But at the same time, it's going to take a public-private partnership.
Yep, I would agree.
Maybe even a Hemp Manhattan project.
And to that point, I mean, in the state of California, it's on the cannabis side, on the medical and adult use side, the state just announced giving out, I think, $5 million in grants on social equity to jurisdictions. There's something called the Hemp for Victory Act that is hopefully going to move through the House, but that would provide grants for both research and not just research on the agronomy side, but research on the marketing and economic side.
Right.
And part of what we're doing too, and just to bring it back to fuel as well, is that we do so much testing, and we found that Oregon is clean, but you've got places in Kentucky and Tennessee and Southeast, Midwest, Michigan this year too. you got all these chemicals that are in the soil because we've been flooding our soil for so long. And so one concept that people are working on is growing hemp for seed, grow it to seed, create the fuel, remediate it there, and then you can do the remediation on the oil to capture those contaminants, separate them, and then use it as a fuel. And you go through that cycle, you clean it up, and then while you're doing that, you can figure out what's the best and highest use for this land, what's the best crop that grows here, how close are you to the customers, and then you can go from there. But you combine that with, like Paul Stamets mushroom mycelium solutions, and that's a big deal. And so that's where I think fuel will play in.
And Jason really touched on kind of like the double-edged sword of hemp and sustainability. Hemp is a very, very powerful phytoremediator, perhaps one of the most powerful phytoremediators in the world. So phytoremediation is using plants to remediate toxic soils. Hemp has been shown to pull not just heavy metals, but fungicides, pesticides, potentially even radioactive isotopes like radium out of the soil. So if you don't have your soil tested, if you don't have your water tested, all kinds of contaminants could get into your crops, not just hemp, cannabis too. This is chemically the same plant. So it's really important to know what is going to be in there contaminant-wise if you're in one of those areas that Jason was talking about. And maybe consider, instead of making hemp for CBD or for food, fuel purposes or plastics.
In the, I don't know, I think it was the late 2000s when we were going out to different county farm bureaus and trying to get them to support our legislation in the state. Actually, the county of Merced, they backed it, and they were really on to using it, as the project being not necessarily as a crop per se or even a rotation crop, but they wanted to line the aqueduct, and near where all the water coming off of the crops, getting into the groundwater and into the aqua duct system to clean what was going into the water.
That's awesome. I did not know that about Merced. I'm really glad to see them being that forward-thinking on some cannabis-related issues.
It's not that really lasted very long, but the point is the intention and the idea, and that somebody at the local county farm bureau was thinking that far ahead.
Well, absolutely.
I think to your point, it's the research and the interest is out there. Like the grants are out there, the problems that needed to be solved are out there, and it's more about how do you insert hemp into that narrative where people might not be thinking about that already. Because if you go out and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to push hemp and push hemp and push hemp, it probably won't happen as quickly as if you're seeking, oh, there's this problem that already exists already, people are already talking about it, how do we insert hemp into that equation? And I think that's probably a lot easier, right? Universities have research grants. There's research grants that exist in these communities that are looking for more sustainable options, and it's probably up to us to go out and seek those and find them and find ways to put hemp into that.
Well, and to that point, the reality is that December 20th of last year, hemp was taken off the schedule. Yeah. But university lawyers and many folks still believe that it sits on the schedule. So the laws changed. They're going to catch up. It's just going to take them a little bit of time because it doesn't. They haven't wrapped their arms around that yet.
Jason, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add, because the lack of regulations is one of the most challenging things that I do, and we have taken the steps to do things as if we're writing the regulations and going above and beyond, testing to California Prop 65, just doing all of these things that people are like, they don't need to do that. Like, yeah, well, you might, and it's the best idea. When you can do it, when you can measure data and when you can do that extra testing, I mean, you do it. It's health.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, now you're getting into consumer safety and protection and how important that is, and and since we're here on the subject, I just have to mention the fact that in California, our legislation AB 228, which was going to help resolve that issue by providing regulatory authority to the Department of Public Health over the processing and manufacturing of hemp extracts and CBD-rich oil, was shut down and shelved until next year, because in large part because of the testing that is required on the cannabis side, and the cannabis side wanted the same level of testing on the hemp side. But the difference between the two is that cannabis or marijuana is on the schedule, and they needed to create their own regulatory systems. Hemp is not on the schedule. It is a food. It is a vegetable. In the state of California, it is covered by something called the Sherman Act, which is an extension of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And the Department of Public Health feels, just in spite of their, not wanting to move forward with regulation, they do believe that the Sherman Act will protect the consumers.
Well, just get to know your farmers.
Yeah.
They're awesome people, and you go by in a day, the work day, and help out for a couple hours. It's fun. So
And that's a very important thing, not just with this, but any food. So I love the farmer's market. So we have about 10 minutes left. I have one last question for our panel, really kind of exploring the boundaries of what sustainability can be here. So like the cannabis industry, the hemp industry faces some really onerous regulations, which can make it less sustainable than it could be. One major pain point for both is packaging, namely how often packaging regulations change and how different they can be from one state to the next, which means if you're a small operator, very, very expensive to stay compliant. Another big issue that's really more on the hemp side than the cannabis side is the issue of crop testing hot. So let's take you to an average hemp farm like up there in Oregon. You might be growing 100 acres of hemp, thousands of plants. If all of that tests hot, you are now out not just all the money, but all the natural resources that went into that. All the water, all the fertilizers, all the everything you've added to that, that is now all gone. It has been wasted. It's not very sustainable. So what can we do about these packaging and testing hot issues to make things a little better?
Well, that is my world. We also have a co-packing facility that's CGMP, where we can make people's products, tinctures, and things like that. So it's something we deal with often. What's happening with these regulations is right now there's 0.3% THC or less, as we know, that defines hemp. And I believe what will happen, or I hope what will happen, is that it'll go up to 1%, because that's reality. What's happening now is that a farm cert or a harvest certification is taken up to 30 days before harvest. And so some of these farm certs, you'll see that the CBD levels are like 1%. Because the hemp doesn't mature and the cannabinoids and everything doesn't grow until the final parts. That's where it really grows. So even though you have a legitimate farm cert, the plant's got 15% CBD or 16% CBD, and maybe it does have half a percentage or a percentage of THC. So those loopholes are challenging, and what they're doing now is really doing it through genetics. And there's a lot of folks out there that have made some really high blend genetics with very low THC, and ultimately everything comes from genetics. It's where it all starts. And when you grow the right plant for the right use, it's efficient and elegant. When you try to extract something from a plant that wasn't grown for that particular use, you can do it, but it costs a lot, and it's not best and highest use. We'll learn more about this in January, February, and then in the years to come, because it'll take a year just to train regulators, and it's going to take years to get them to actually do those proactive tests. It'll be fun. We'll see.
But the important point that's raised is what do you do with that hemp when it does go hot? And what we need to be working towards is industrialized use of that hemp in spite of that. And it's about educating the politicians and the regulators that we can do this and we can figure it out.
So rather than saying destroy it, remediate it into like a bioplastic or something.
Or animal bedding or...
Well, in Oregon, so states' rights are so powerful, right? So in Oregon, we can actually still harvest that. We just have to follow the process and remediate it, and it can only be so hot. And we do remediate our distillate. What we use is light and oxygen and lasers to convert THC to CBN. Other folks do it. There's rhodochrome chromatography. It's been around for a long time, where you can soak it and remove the THC. But we just like light and gas. It's easier.
The final point that I would make, Mitchell, before you open it up, is on the packaging and the labeling, at least on the hemp side. Until marijuana is off the schedule, we can't get to this. But we need, and what we're working towards and what we envision are national standards. We've got a patchwork quilt of states that are all approaching it in a different way. You've got various trends that are starting. and what I'm speaking to in a lot right now is the CBD-rich hemp oil products, and there are states like Florida that are kind of in Indiana and Texas that are leading the way in terms of QR codes and getting a certain amount of information that are available to consumers, and that it's something that's applied not just at the state level but nationally, and hopefully FDA will get there. It's going to take them a little bit of time.
They will.
Probably 2 to 3 year process. So in the meantime, it's left to the states to lead the way and try to establish whatever that future national standard is going to be.
Yeah, and most companies are, at least that want to be available domestically, are looking at what are those most egregious states and following those policies. And then, getting to your point on the sustainability and packaging and how you leverage that, I think that is a little bit of, we need to hold ourselves to a bit more of a North Star. There are lots of products going out today that are in single-use plastics, or, what do you do with a tincture bottle? What do you do with the box that it comes in? There's a company out here, Halsa. They're 100% using sustainable materials that can be recycled. And so I think it's more of a topic or a point that was brought up in another panel is we have to lead that charge, right? If we're saying we'll use hemp bioplastics or use, sustainable packaging, we've got to drive that for ourselves and say, well, why can't we make, some type of hemp type packaging that products can ship in? Like, why not? And let's push and go for that, versus like sourcing stuff from China and saying, okay, well, I'm going to make this most beautiful product and it's going to do all these amazing things, but I'm going to put it in a box that costs 12 cents and I'm going to ship it out, and hopefully the customer figures it out.
And we can demand that, and then as this grows and we keep educating our neighbors and friends and new users come on, then they'll experience that too, and then it can spread to others. And that's, right. I think we have a big responsibility to demand that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we went a little over where I wanted to, but we still have about 5 minutes for Q&A. If anyone wants to form a line there at the mic to ask questions or just stand up, the room's pretty intimate. You could probably just, shout out. Yeah, so my full-time work right now is on the issue of vape pen recycling, which is really complicated because these are multi-material things. They're composites. They're very complicated. Right now, we don't really have any good ways to be recycling vape pens. What is potentially recyclable is plastics, cardboards, other things. Hemp bioplastics, really, the nice thing there is you don't even necessarily have to worry about recycling because it's going to be potentially biodegradable, or it could actually be captured and then reused into a new hemp plastic alternative. So, the great thing about hemp plastics is it's not even so much recycling at this point, it just becomes biodegradable or reusable.
Yeah, when we think about the products that we're sourcing and wanting to showcase on our platform, it's a lot of, okay, what are these single-use things that we could get rid of? When you think about plastics, so like 1 billion toothbrushes are going to end up in landfills, right? And they take 400 years.
What's the
400 years. Yeah, like to degrade. If and then
if we're lucky, they end up in landfills. If we're unlucky, they end up in the ocean.
Right, and then it's like these plastic bits, right? That still, even when they do decompose, they're ending up in our basically our food supply and our food chain. Yeah, and so we have these hemp bioplastic toothbrushes made from some composites of C2 Renew. They will be on the site next week. But yeah, they're
so I'm going to use that discount on.
You will, yes. But you pluck out the bristles and you throw it in the recycling bin, and in 30 days it's gone. And like that's the kind of thing that we want to push for is, taking these plastics. This is not bioplastic in particular, but you go to the grocery store, you throw your avocados and your tomatoes and other stuff in these plastic bags you pull off. Well, this woman, Katie, who her mission is to like really rid the world of single-use plastics, developed this brand called the Sunshine Series, and she creates these hemp bags, essentially, that you take to the store and you use those, and then you can wash them. So, and again, microfibers aren't going into your water supply. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking to push for. They're hemp straws. So you guys, I'm sure you see the paper ones, and I don't know about you, but my 4-year-old is like, ugh, he hates it because the stuff is all in the mouth. And so can we create some hemp straws, looking for other, solutions? So there's a lot of opportunity, basically.
But there's also, the carbon emissions that go into the production of plastics. And so you've got unsustainable oil being used and emitted into our, or carbon emitted into our atmosphere at the same time that there's a shelf life of these products and materials for 1,000 years or whatever it is. And I'm a scuba diver, and going and diving in the South Pacific and seeing somebody's plastic bag from India isn't cool. It's just not fun.
And stop using single-use plastics as best you can, right? I mean, make things that last longer. I think that's something that...
And biodegrade.
Yep.
You look at the old cars, you look at old things. I mean, fixing and repairing, it's a much better way. And just
Better
the
than programmed
convenience.
obsolescence.
Yeah, just go to Cuba. I mean, they've got some great cars from the 50s.
Well, and it kind of goes into our overall change of our lifestyle, and it really requires us looking at ourselves and knowing what we know now about our world. How would we design it? What would it look like? How would we transport ourselves? How would we eat? Where would our water come from? What is money? All these things. It's generational healing that we got to work on. But using less plastic it's a really good step.
This is
in
a
the right
healer
direction.
plant, not just the marijuana side, the hemp side too. Do you see another question there?
Yeah, we talk about the hemp as a biodegrader when it's used, if we use it in packaging and that. But the scenario that I see with the FDA having oversight over what will be our food supply with hemp, usually you have to have food safe linings within specific types of fibers so they can go to the market. So do you see that we're going to lose some of that really favorable environmental impact because now we have to use things that are chemicals?
So if I understand the question right, to get things food safe, you have to add certain chemical solvents, coatings. Yeah. In a recent talk that I had with Sauna Packaging, it sounds like they're definitely able to make something that is a food-grade plastic out of hemp bioplastics. They didn't mention any sort of additives, but I also didn't think to ask about those. So I know that Sauna at least has an option to make food-grade plastics possible.
Yeah, I think it's there will be some of that, right, because of the regulations, especially when it comes to food. But when you think about the tinctures or anything else, I mean, that's just that's a product going in. It doesn't necessarily need certain specific wrappers in it, right? It just needs a box. And can that box be more sustainably made, right? Can it be derived from hemp?
Or you mean like Tetra Pak style packaging, like those things that have the liners? I mean, it seems that they could make it food safe, and it'll just have to go through it. I mean, I don't know.
Again,
why they wouldn't.
it's just adapting.
I'd have to
and
call a friend
evolving
on
and
that one.
using ingenuity. It's what we do. We do that well.
Right
The
on.
meta wheat.
Well, we are 2 minutes past, but I don't see anyone rushing us off the stage yet, so...
They want the code.
I mean, I can talk a little bit about it.
Let me put the phone to the microphone and.
I mean, my understanding is that I think it was in New York, and there were some engineers. They were studying it, and some of the nanoparticles. And I don't know if anybody in the audience there can help me with this, but exactly where these were coming from. But these nanoparticles, and he was experimenting with it, and he found that it actually in this certain form, it could act like graphite and transmit energy even more efficiently. So they could produce it at a much less expensive way, and it was more efficient. So, I mean, I'm not an engineer or scientist. That's about as far as I go with it.
If you're interested in that, I know that 9Fiber, when I spoke to them recently, was talking about using hemp hurd for superconductor materials. So they could probably speak to you a little bit about that.
We got to get Elon on this. I
Absolutely.
think he's already probably on it.
I mean, he's already on the weed side of things for sure. So I think we're definitely out of time, and it looks like we might be out of questions. So thank you all very much for
Can
coming
I
out
just do
today.
my plug real quick?
Thank you,
So-
everyone.
Please, please.
Yeah.
Give us
So
the code.
you can go to ehemp.com. Your code is New West. We're going to give you 10% off your first hemp purchase. Hopefully it's a T-shirt. Hopefully it's something else that replaces, a single-use throwaway. So. Yeah, all lowercase. One word, all lowercase. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. And
Thank
thank
you.
you all so much for coming out today. I really appreciate your commitment to sustainability.
Thanks. We could do that for a while.